Some words seem like nothing more than fleeting cuts, yet they turn into blades that carve deep scars for a lifetime. The day Richard mocked and abandoned Amelia, he believed he had condemned her forever to be useless, unworthy of love. But 10 years later, that woman returned, not to seek revenge in bitterness, but to prove the power of love, resilience, and a heart once trampled that could still rise again in radiant strength. This is not only a story about a broken marriage, but also a triumphant anthem of justice, of standing up against the prejudice that a person's worth lies in their ability to please someone else. And above all, it is a woman's journey to find the light within herself, a light bright enough to illuminate the whole world. The Chelsea mansion glittered with crystal lights, but inside Amelia Hart's heart was as dark as an abyss. The house had once been a dream, the proof of a love she believed eternal. Every brick, every corner of the walls carried the years she and her husband had built together. Yet now, beneath the dazzling glow of chandeliers imported from Venice, it was nothing but a stage for a cruel play. Richard Whitmore, her husband, the man whose smile once made Amelia's heart race, stood in the grand hall with a face as cold as ice. The grey-blue eyes that had once looked at her with tenderness now gleamed with disdain. In his hand was a glass of red wine, the shimmering liquid like blood. Every sip Richard took was another full stop to the hopes Amelia had clung to for 3 long years. "You really thought things would turn out differently?" His voice echoed through the vast room, slicing like a cold blade. "You thought if you tried a few more times, injected a few more hormones, spent money on a few more doctors, that a miracle would happen. You thought your broken body would suddenly know how to do the bare minimum that every other woman does naturally." Amelia froze. In her hands was the latest hormone test result from the clinic. The paper trembled, ready to slip away, but her heart had already been shattered. Every word Richard spoke was not just sound, but arrows piercing through the last defense she had fought to hold. She had heard his cruel words before, but his ruthlessness stripped away all pretense today. "Richard," her voice broke, hoarse and lost in the void. "Dr. Ashcroft said there's still hope. He thinks if we change the treatment protocol—" "Enough!" Richard cut her off, hurling the glass to the floor. Crystal shattered, scattering against his leather shoes, while crimson drops seeped into the Persian rug like bloodstains. He didn't spare a glance at the shards, only lowered his voice to a chilling calm that made Amelia shiver. "I'm done with these delusions. I've poured a fortune into this for 3 years, and what have I gotten? Nothing but disappointment. You have failed. You are a failure." The word failure echoed in Amelia's head, tolling like a death knell. She had heard it whispered by society, in the pitying eyes of friends, in the weariness of family. But now, from the very man she had once believed her soulmate, it came sharp and naked, sealing an invisible sentence. "I've met someone else." Richard strode casually to the mahogany table and pulled out a yellow envelope. He tossed it at Amelia's feet, as if throwing scraps to a dog. "Clarissa Vaughan, 23, beautiful, intelligent, from a distinguished family. And most importantly, she can bear children, something you will never have." Amelia collapsed to the cold marble floor, trembling hands picking up the envelope. Inside was a divorce agreement already signed, black ink on white paper, a death warrant for a love once sworn eternal. Her vision blurred, but not only from tears. It was as though a fire had erupted inside her, burning her from within. She could no longer tell if it was anger, pain, or despair, only a suffocating, searing mix. "You." Her voice was barely a whisper, but carried an uncanny strength. "You once promised never to abandon me. We swore to face every trial together. I believed. I loved you with everything I had." Richard laughed, not the warm laugh of years past, but a hollow, merciless sound. It rang under the high dome like the triumphant roar of a predator when its prey finally collapses. "You're still so naive, Amelia. This is the real world. Marriage isn't just love. It's about gain, honor, and legacy. You can't give me what I need, making you a burden, and I won't carry burdens anymore." Suddenly, Amelia felt weightless, like her soul had slipped away from her body. She looked around the splendid mansion, the marble spiral staircase, the oil paintings, the crystal vases from her grandmother's time. Once, they were memories, proof of love. Now, they were nothing but the backdrop for her execution. In that moment, Amelia realized something. It wasn't her heart breaking, but the mirror of illusion shattering. The love she had clung to was nothing more than a gilded cage. Inside it, she had been trapped by hollow promises, unreasonable expectations, and the tyranny of a man who had never truly seen her as a partner. "You're right," Amelia whispered, rising to her feet, clutching the envelope like a fragile shield. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry. "No one will ever love me the way you did. Because the way you loved was never love at all, but possession. And you just gave me the greatest gift, freedom." Richard froze. He had expected tears, pleading, and collapse. Instead, he saw a woman regaining her stance. Her eyes kindled with something unfamiliar. Resolve. "You will regret this." Amelia spoke softly, yet her voice carried farther than any of Richard's laughter. "Not because you lost me, but because you'll never know what true love really island." Then she turned, climbing the stairs step by step. Behind her, Richard stood among shards of broken crystal, his eyes flickering with an unease he did not recognize. Inside Amelia, an uncanny calm spread. The pain was still there, but mingled with it was a fragile spark, the spark of truth. False love had died, and from its ashes, something new was stirring. A silent vow to herself that this was not the end. This was the beginning. London was nothing but a cold labyrinth in the first days after the divorce. Amelia Hart left the Chelsea mansion carrying only a few suitcases and a wooden box, holding the single unbroken crystal set, a gift from her grandmother. The small rented flat on the outskirts of Oxford had no chandeliers or Persian rugs, only the musty smell of old walls and the rattle of buses outside. But to Amelia, it was the only place she could breathe. At first, waking up each morning was a battle. Her body was used to wide beds and silk pillows, not stiff mattresses and a chilly single room. But the most challenging part wasn't the discomfort of material things, the space beside her. That emptiness reminded her that the man who had once sworn to love her for life was now hand in hand with a younger woman, flaunting beauty and fertility like a victory crown. Amelia knew that if she stayed in resentment, she would drown. So, one misty morning, she went to Oxford, walked along the moss-covered rows of ancient houses, and decided to enroll in an evening program in international economic law. She had only an old bachelor's degree and the determination to rebuild herself. The admissions clerk eyed her with doubt. "Are you sure? This program is very demanding. Even young students drop out halfway." Amelia smiled, a trembling but steady smile. "I have nothing left to lose." By day, she had worked any job she could find, waiting tables at a cafe, assisting at events, and sometimes doing translation work for tourists. By night, she put on her old coat and stepped into the lecture hall. Each time she saw the eager, youthful faces of students around her, Amelia felt out of place. But through every textbook, every case study, she rediscovered something long buried, her intellect. She realized she was not foolish, and certainly not useless as Richard had once claimed. A turning point came one winter evening. Amelia was serving at a political fundraising event in London. She was dressed in a black uniform with a tray of champagne in hand and tried to be invisible. Her only task, pour, smile, retreat. But as she passed a group of senators and diplomats, she overheard a debate about UK-Asia trade policy. One senator spoke passionately, but Amelia detected a glaring flaw in his argument. Her heart pounded. The old Amelia urged silence and safety, but a voice inside whispered, "If you stay quiet, you'll always be nothing but a servant in their eyes." She drew a deep breath and spoke. "Excuse me," Amelia said, her voice trembling yet firm. "You mentioned raising import taxes to protect the domestic textile industry, but have you considered the impact on small businesses in Manchester? They rely on Asian fabrics. If costs rise, they'll be the first to collapse." The group turned to look at her. A heavy silence fell. Amelia wanted to swallow her words, to flee. But then, the older senator narrowed his eyes and nodded. "Who are you?" Amelia Hart, international law student, Oxford. To her surprise, a smile spread across his face. "You're right. That's a perspective many of my advisors never raised." Amelia couldn't remember how she finished serving that night. What stayed with her was the look of respect in his eyes. For the first time in years, someone saw her not as a failed wife or infertile woman, but as a mind worth listening to. From that moment, Amelia changed her way of living. She printed cheap business cards titled Amelia Hart, graduate student in international law and economics. The cards were plain, but she felt a piece of her identity return whenever she handed one out. Amelia became a frequent speaker in class, unafraid to challenge professors with difficult questions. Some younger students laughed at her at first. "She's just a washed-up woman trying to look smart." But as her name topped the class scores repeatedly, their mockery turned into wary respect. The pain had not vanished. There were still nights, she cried, haunted by Richard's cruel laughter. But unlike before, every tear led her back to her laptop, adding pages to her thesis. She turned tears into ink, humiliation into fuel. Another time, while clearing tables at an economics conference, Amelia overheard scholars debating the EU-Africa trade agreement. A young professor, the very type of man Richard had always admired, sneered at her presence. What would a waitress know about international policy? Heat flushed Amelia's face, but she did not flinch. "Professor," she replied coldly, "I am not only a server. I am also an Oxford student, and I can prove your report omits critical data from Nigeria." The table fell silent. The professor turned red, unable to argue back. After the event, a young journalist approached Amelia for a short interview. The article was tucked into a small side column, but to her, it was her first piece of public recognition. The final piece of this stage came from within Amelia herself. One late evening, after her shift, she stood alone on Magdalen Bridge, gazing down at the Thames. The cold wind cut her skin, and the dark water surged below. She remembered Richard's words, "You're useless. No one will ever love you." Amelia inhaled deeply and closed her eyes. For the first time, instead of collapsing, she whispered an answer to herself. "You're wrong. I may not have found someone who knows how to love me yet, but I can learn to love myself." In that moment, she felt her body lighten. For the first time in months, she saw a faint spark, like a flicker of fire in the winter night, and she knew that she could build a new life from the shards of what was broken. Amelia Hart sat in the ancient stone lecture hall of Oxford, her hands clutching her notebook so tightly that her fingers went numb. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting dust motes into the air like flecks of gold. Professor Callum Blackstone had just announced the opportunity every student craved, a summer internship at the European Commission in Brussels, working directly with international trade negotiation teams. At once, the sluggish air of a spring morning turned into a fever of ambition. The students around her buzzed with excitement, pens scratching furiously, chairs scraping against the floor. Amelia sat still, her heart pounding. She knew this was a chance that could change her life. Yet as soon as hope flickered, a cold voice from the past echoed, "You are nothing, a useless woman. No one needs you." Richard Whitmore's voice resounded like a verdict carved into her soul. In that moment, Amelia felt herself split in two. One half wanted to rise and declare she would compete, proving herself no less capable than anyone else. The other half hissed with venom, "You're just a discarded wife, surviving by cleaning up after banquets and pouring coffee. Can you compare with those raised in castles since birth?" As the noise in the hall subsided, Professor Blackstone's gaze swept across the rows. His eyes lingered a moment longer on Amelia. In that stern look was something like a challenge. Amelia swallowed hard. She knew he had noticed her persistence over the past 2 years. The only student juggling 3 jobs yet never once missing a deadline or begging for favors. That day's lecture ended. Students spilled into the marble corridor, chattering about the upcoming essay. Amelia strolled, each step heavier than the last. Outside, daffodils bloomed brightly in the spring breeze, but within her chest, a storm raged. Amelia spread blank paper across the desk that evening in her small rented room. Besides, there was a cup of cold tea and heavy books. She stared at the page for a long time, then whispered, "If you let this pass, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Fear still lurked, but a small flame had caught, and she resolved not to let the past chain her any longer. The next day, Amelia threw herself into research. After her morning shift at the cafe, she rushed to the Bodleian Library, sitting for hours beneath the golden glow of old lamps, turning page after page on trade policy. At night, while most students slept, she hunched over her desk, scribbling the first lines of her essay. Each time her eyelids drooped, she recalled Richard's cold laughter, a whip striking her willpower, forcing her to lift her head again. Amelia chose a daring topic: inequality in global trade agreements, and how smaller nations are pushed out of negotiations. Instead of sterile citations, she wove in her experience as a political banquet server. She recalled snatches of overheard dialogue, the frowns of diplomats over unfavorable terms, the calculating nods behind raised glasses of wine. Fragments that seemed meaningless now formed a picture few in her class could see. The week of preparation became a blur of exhaustion. By day, Amelia smiled at customers, balancing trays of scalding coffee. By evening, she borrowed a pair of worn high heels, walking between candlelit banquet tables, feigning invisibility while her ears caught every word. At night, she scrubbed away cheap makeup and bent once more over papers scrawled with notes until dawn. More than once, she nearly gave up. One evening, with her draft almost 40 pages unfinished, she collapsed in tears. Richard's voice roared again in her mind. "No one will love you. No one will respect you. You're worthless." Her tears smudged the ink. Yet in her despair, Amelia remembered her grandmother, who once held her hand and whispered, "My child, your worth is not in what others demand from you, but in who you dare to become." Amelia wiped her face, drew a long breath, and continued writing. The words flowed then, as if guided by an unseen strength. The final presentation day arrived. Oxford's grand hall gleamed with light. On the front row sat the judges, professors, diplomats from Brussels, and economic experts. The air was taut with nerves. Many students' hands shook as they clutched their notes. When Amelia Hart's name was called, she rose, her legs weak. Her shoes struck the wooden floor with each step, echoing in her chest. She remembered kneeling on that old Persian rug in Richard's mansion, his laughter scornful as he called her useless. The memory almost made her stumble. But Amelia lifted her chin and mounted the podium. The hall fell silent, waiting. "Ladies and gentlemen," Amelia began, her voice trembling at first but soon steady, "I want to speak about nations without a voice in the global trade game. I have witnessed this imbalance in books and the very banquets where I worked as a server. There, as glasses of wine were drained, unfair terms were signed. And who suffers? The small people who have no seat in the room." The hall was hushed. Amelia went on, every word sharpened by years of endurance. She analyzed data, exposed flaws in current policies, and proposed reforms to ensure weaker nations would not be silenced. Her voice grew stronger, blazing like fire from ashes. When she finished, Amelia lifted her gaze to the panel. A tense silence hovered, then applause erupted, first scattered, then swelling into a roar. Professor Blackstone nodded slightly, his usually cold eyes glinting with rare acknowledgement. A Belgian diplomat leaned forward and asked, "Where did you draw this perspective from?" Amelia answered calmly, "From observing the world while standing where others chose not to see me. It was in invisibility that I saw what others overlooked." Back in her small room, Amelia sat quietly by the window that night. Outside, Oxford's golden lamps reflected on the slow river. The slip of paper was in her hands. Selected candidate, Amelia Hart. Her heart trembled, tears streaming freely. Not for the victory, but because she felt she had truly stepped out of Richard's shadow for the first time in years. She whispered, "You are no longer the one left behind. You are a phoenix, and you have begun to fly." Amelia Hart had never imagined setting foot in the Royal Albert Hall in any role other than a server. Yet tonight, She stood before the magnificent building with an invitation in her hand, a small reward the event company gave to its most hard-working staff. The navy blue dress she wore was borrowed from a co-worker, the high heels were bought second-hand at a flea market, and her hair was pinned up neatly by her hands. Compared to the elegant ladies stepping out of gleaming limousines, Amelia knew she couldn't match them. Still, she lifted her chin and walked in, treating this as a gift to herself after months of toil. Inside, the space glittered with crystal lights, tables draped in white linen, candles flickering, wine shimmering in crystal glasses, and an orchestra playing a gentle waltz. Amelia stayed close to the drinks counter, reminding herself she was only here to watch, to savor a rare taste of luxury. But as she turned, her eyes met a gaze that seemed to freeze the world. Across the room, among guests in expensive tuxedos, stood a tall man conversing with a senator. His stance was steady, his shoulders broad, his face stern, yet his eyes carried a strange gentleness. Those eyes, a deep, warm brown, as though they could pierce through every layer of defense, were fixed directly on her. Amelia's heart stumbled. She turned away, feigning interest in the wineglass in her hand, but within moments, she heard a deep voice at her side. "Forgive me if I intrude, but I couldn't let you leave without saying something. You have the most remarkable eyes I've ever seen." Startled, Amelia looked up. The man stood beside her, close enough that she caught a faint trace of cologne, wood and bergamot mingling in the air. He smiled, and the sincerity of it shook the walls she had so carefully built. "Is that the opening line you use on every woman?" she asked, trying to sound composed while her chest tightened. "No," he replied at once, his gaze unwavering. "I'm terrible at small talk, but when I saw you, I couldn't stay silent." The simplicity of the answer, its lack of polish, disarmed her. Before she could reply, he extended his hand. "Edward Sterling." "A pleasure." His hand was warm, steady. When their fingers touched, a faint current ran down Amelia's spine. She quickly withdrew, clearing her throat. "Amelia Hart." "Amelia," Edward repeated softly, as if tasting the sound. "A beautiful name, but I suspect there's much more behind it." She let out a short laugh, though inside she bristled with caution. This man was too confident, too captivating. She knew this type well. Richard had once stepped into her life with the same eyes and promises. The scar in her heart had not healed. She could not trust so easily again. "Excuse me, I should return to my table," Amelia said, stepping back. Edward didn't press, didn't rush. He only smiled. "I'll be here, however long it takes." For the rest of the gala, Amelia avoided his gaze. Yet each time her eyes strayed, she found him still there, quietly watching, patient as though he could wait for hours for a single word. When the evening drew to a close, Amelia slipped outside for air. The London night was crisp, street lamps casting golden light on damp pavement. She thought she would leave, ending this as a fleeting encounter. But when she turned, Edward was still there, coat draped over his shoulders, waiting. "Don't you have anything better to do than stand here?" she blurted, half embarrassed, half astonished. "I do," Edward said calmly, "but nothing more important than seeing you again." Amelia fell silent. Her eyes prickled, though she wasn't sure if from emotion or fear. Fear that if she took one more step, she would again hand her heart to someone who might break it. Edward seemed to sense the battle within her. He didn't move closer, only said gently, "I'm not in a hurry, but if one day you'd like to share a dinner, I'll be ready." He handed her a business card, then bid her good night, disappearing into the London dark. Amelia stood motionless, the card trembling in her hand. On it were only simple words: Edward Sterling, Sterling Enterprises. No promises, no embellishment, just space left for her choice. Amelia felt the door to her heart crack open for the first time in years, and she knew destiny had just knocked. Amelia had thought she would tuck the business card into a drawer and never look at it again. That night, after returning to her small flat, she placed it beside a pile of books and unfinished drafts on her desk. Each time her eyes landed on it, her heart wavered. She told herself she was too busy, that a man like Edward Sterling must have been acting on a fleeting whim, that her past had already taught her a costly lesson. Never trust eyes that make you feel as though the world has stopped. But the card stayed there, silent, like an invitation patiently waiting. A week later, after her cafe shift, Amelia spotted a familiar figure in the corner. Edward. He wasn't in the dazzling tuxedo from the gala, just a plain white shirt and a long coat, but the simplicity made him stand out even more. He was reading a newspaper, his coffee half forgotten. When their eyes met, he smiled, unsurprised, as if he had always known they would meet again here. "What are you doing here?" Amelia asked as she moved behind the counter, her voice a mixture of surprise and unease. "Having coffee and waiting." Edward shrugged lightly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Waiting for who?" "You." Heat rushed to Amelia's cheeks. She turned away, busying herself with another order, but her hands trembled so much that a spoon clattered against a glass. Edward didn't laugh, didn't mock. He just sat there, patient. When the cafe grew quieter, he approached the counter. "Amelia, I don't want to trouble you. If you'd allow, I'd like to invite you for a walk around Christchurch Meadow after your shift. No wine, no waltz music, just a quiet evening. If you say no, I'll respect that." Amelia looked into his eyes. There was something so steady and genuine that it was hard to resist. She hesitated, then gave a slight nod. That night, they walked along the stone path around the meadow. The crescent moon hung low, silver light spilling onto the Cherwell. Edward didn't bombard her with questions or long speeches. He only shared bits of himself. His first failed business, the pressure of running the family company, his secret love for old architecture he rarely revealed because he thought no one cared. Amelia listened, slowly allowing herself to relax. Beneath the polished exterior of success and confidence, she saw a man who knew failure and worry and longed to be understood. When Edward asked, "And you, Amelia? Why international trade law?" she stayed silent for a long while. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke of the nights serving at banquets, overhearing grand conversations while being treated as invisible. "I realized the world is full of voices ignored, and I didn't want to be one of them anymore." Edward studied her intently. "You were never invisible, Amelia. They just weren't wise enough to see." The words reverberated inside her like a truth she had been craving for years. Their subsequent meetings unfolded naturally. Some mornings, Edward appeared at the cafe with a basket of warm croissants, saying, "No one should start a shift on just black coffee." Some evenings, he quietly waited after class, driving her home in an old car instead of sending a driver. Proof he wasn't there to impress, but to be present. Gradually, Amelia saw that Edward wasn't in a rush. He didn't demand, didn't push, didn't shower her with hollow promises. He was there, patient and constant, like roses blooming after a storm, slower, gentler, but enduring. One evening by the Thames, the chill wind made Amelia shiver. Edward immediately slipped off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture made her chest tighten. Richard had once been gallant, but those hands later tore her trust apart. Reflexively, Amelia removed the coat and handed it back. Edward accepted it without offense. He only said quietly, "I understand. You're not ready to trust. I won't hurry you. But Amelia, I hope one day, when you feel the cold, you won't mind letting me keep you warm." She turned away, hiding the sudden tear that slipped down her cheek. A locked door within her heart had opened, just slightly. That night, lying on her narrow bed, Amelia thought of Edward, the way he looked at her, not as a prize, but as a mystery he wanted to honor. The warmth in his voice, not with empty promises, but with steady presence. She was afraid, yet she longed for it too. She knew that if she allowed it, this man could prove that love didn't have to be chains. It could be wings. Amelia whispered to herself in the haze before sleep claimed her. Perhaps these are the second roses, blooming late, but strong, and beautiful enough to soothe even the oldest scars. That morning, Amelia woke in her tiny flat, sunlight slipping through a dusty window pane. She had spent the night restless. Edward had become a new rhythm in recent weeks that left her afraid and quietly grateful. Each thought of him warmed her heart, yet set it racing. But after years of wounds, her trust was like shattered glass, each shard sharp, ready to cut anyone who touched it. That evening, Edward asked her to meet him in the Cotswolds, to show you a small secret of spring in England, he'd said. Amelia hesitated long before the cracked mirror. She chose a simple beige dress, worn flats already fraying at the edges. He's a wealthy man, used to dazzling women. And me. The thought nearly stopped her, but she drew a breath. If all he sees is the surface, tonight will end this, and I'll know the truth. Edward was waiting at the entrance of an old manor nestled in the green countryside. He drove a silver vintage Jaguar, but it wasn't the car that caught Amelia's eye. It was how he smiled when he saw her, not with judgment or comparison, but with the gentle certainty that she was all he had been waiting for. He led her along a gravel path lined with wild roses. At the end lay a vast garden, thousands of roses in bloom beneath the twilight sky. Their sweet fragrance filled the air, and Amelia inhaled deeply without meaning to. "This was my mother's garden," Edward said softly. "She tended it all her life. After she passed, I've kept it alive for her. I've never brought anyone here, but with you. I wanted to share it." Amelia was still. In his eyes, she saw a trembling grief, an unhealed wound, and she realized Edward, too, carried his losses, and it made him anything but distant from her. As sunset deepened, they sat on a stone bench among the roses. From his pocket, Edward drew a small box and opened it. Inside lay a platinum band, set with a single luminous pearl, no sparkling diamond, no excess, pure and soft as moonlight. "Amelia Hart," Edward said, his voice deep and steady. "I don't promise a life without hardship. I don't promise perfection, but I promise to respect you, listen, and hold your hand through all of it. Will you give me the honor of calling you my wife?" Tears filled Amelia's eyes. In her head, Richard's cruel laughter echoed, "Useless. No one will want you." But before her, Edward knelt, gaze bright with unwavering sincerity. The contrast struck her like freedom. "Yes," she whispered, trembling but resolute. "Yes, I will." They wed in a small ceremony with a few friends and colleagues from Oxford. No extravagance, no spectacle. Amelia wore a simple white dress, hair pinned neatly, hand in hand with Edward, as they walked down an aisle strewn with rose petals. Amelia looked up at the stained glass light pouring from above when the vicar spoke blessings, and peace surged through her. She was no longer the abandoned woman in a marble mansion. She was a wife, loved for who she was. For their honeymoon, they went to Provence. Amid lavender fields stretching violet beneath the sky, Amelia and Edward sat on the porch of a stone cottage, watching a night sky ablaze with stars. And there, the miracle came. One morning, Amelia felt something different. Nausea, fatigue, a strange sensitivity. A hunch led her to the small-town clinic. Amelia's hands trembled when the doctor smiled and handed her the ultrasound. She was pregnant, but the actual shock lay on the screen. 2 tiny heartbeats. Twins. Amelia broke down in the exam room, her sobs mixed with laughter she couldn't contain. For years, she had been shackled by insults, infertile, broken. Within her, 2 fragile lives grew, the most powerful proof that every cruel word had been nothing but lies. That evening, she handed Edward the ultrasound. He stared, then suddenly pulled her into his arms. His broad shoulders shook, and for the first time, Amelia saw Edward cry. "Thank you," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving me a family." Amelia leaned against his chest, listening to his strong heartbeat merge with hers. Above Provence, thousands of stars shimmered as if smiling down. She knew her life had entered a new chapter of love, hope, and a miracle named Henry and Oliver Sterling. That autumn, Oxford was blanketed in falling gold leaves. Amelia stood at the window of the small house she and Edward shared, her hand resting on her round belly. Inside, 2 tiny lives stirred, tapping out rhythms of joy with every movement. Edward always joked that since learning he would be a father, he had stopped being a cold businessman and turned into a clumsy worrier, fussing over Amelia's meals, the cushion behind her back, and even the sofa's angle. Each evening, He lay his hand on her belly and read poems or played music to their children. "So they'll know their father's voice," he said, his eyes glowing with hope. Amelia often wept quietly as she watched him, not from sadness, but from the sheer force of emotion. Once, she had believed she would never hear her husband whisper to their child, yet now, 2 strong heartbeats echoed inside her, proud and alive. The birth came sooner than expected. That night, when the first contraction struck, Amelia gripped Edward's hand. He rushed her to the hospital, frantic, yet through the long hours of labor, he never left her side, wiping her sweat, whispering encouragement, reminding her of her strength. At 3:12 a.m., the first cry rang out. A baby boy, his tiny hand already curled tight. 4 minutes later, another cry followed, higher, as if announcing himself boldly, 2 sons, healthy, full of life. "Henry and Oliver," Edward whispered, his voice trembling as he cradled them both. "Named for the men who taught me that family is sacred." Amelia's heart burst. In her arms, 2 small bodies squirmed, searching for her breast. In that instant, every past wound, every insult, every lonely night dissolved. All that remained was love, pure and unshakable. Motherhood was not easy. Twins meant sleepless nights doubled, soothing cries doubled. Yet whenever exhaustion threatened to break her, Amelia saw Edward pacing the dark room with a baby on his shoulder, humming lullabies. That image refilled her strength. The house soon became a home brimming with laughter. In the mornings, Amelia nursed in the armchair while Edward read the paper, his eyes always drifting back to his wife and son. Afternoons, they strolled through the park, the twins bundled in a double stroller beneath cream-colored blankets Amelia had knitted. Evenings, after Henry and Oliver were asleep, Amelia and Edward sat together in warm lamplight, speaking of dreams and plans for the future. Amelia also began building her own career. Drawing on her Oxford research, she opened a small consultancy in international education. Edward encouraged her and set aside a room in their home as her office. "I want our sons to grow up knowing their mother is both tender and strong," he told her. Her work flourished. Universities and educational organizations sought her advice. She was no longer the woman dismissed as useless. She was a respected expert, a mother, a wife, a whole person. When Henry and Oliver turned 2, Amelia took them to the cemetery where her grandmother rested. She laid 2 bouquets of white daisies on the grave and whispered, "Do you see, Grandma? I'm no longer alone. I have a family, 2 little angels, and I am happy. Thank you for always being with me." The boys giggled and ran among the headstones, while Edward stood behind them, silent and proud. At that moment, Amelia realized that the past may leave scars, but love and resilience can turn scars into proof of strength. In their warmly lit home, Edward wrapped his arms around her from behind that night and murmured, "Do you know, whenever I see you playing with Henry and Oliver, I feel like the luckiest man in the world." Amelia smiled, turning to meet his gaze, "And every time I see you lull them to sleep, I know I chose the right man." Outside, Oxford shimmered with lights. Inside, a true home had been built, one no cruel word from the past could ever reach. That winter afternoon, London was shrouded in grey fog. Amelia stepped out of the building where she had just finished a lecture on international education and social justice. The hall had been packed, questions pouring in, applause resounding as she ended. She smiled, signed a few books for readers, then hurried off, knowing Henry and Oliver were waiting for her to take them to a children's concert. Just as she pushed through the revolving glass doors of the hotel, a familiar figure appeared. At first, Amelia thought her eyes were playing tricks, but when the streetlight fell across his face, she recognized Richard. He was no longer the dashing man in expensive suits. Richard looked worn, his face gaunt, dark circles under his eyes, his wrinkled suit hanging like something hastily grabbed from a second-hand shop. He stood there, hesitant, as if afraid to come closer, then called softly, "Amelia." The sound made her heart pause for a beat. But unlike 10 years ago, when his voice would have made her tremble, Amelia now felt nothing. Richard. Her tone was calm. No anger, no bitterness, just the simple utterance of a stranger's name. "What are you doing here?" Richard forced a crooked smile. I came to congratulate you. You're famous now. The papers write about you, calling you one of the most influential young experts in education. I've been following. Amelia folded her arms, gaze steady. Why follow me? We divorced long ago. Everything between us ended then. Richard lowered his head, as though crushed by the weight of memory. His voice broke into a whisper. I was wrong, terribly wrong. When I left you, I thought I'd find happiness, a perfect family. But it all collapsed. My work failed, and the woman I left you for abandoned me. I have nothing. Amelia listened, her heart still unshaken. She remembered the days he hurled cruel words at her. You're useless. You'll never amount to anything. Now, before her stood a Richard, small and broken, stripped of power. What do you want from me? She asked evenly. Richard lifted his eyes, pleading. I want a chance. I don't deserve it. But I can't bear watching you so happy while I have nothing. I thought, maybe we could. Enough. Amelia cut him off, her voice as sharp as a blade. Do you know what I went through after your humiliation? The nights I asked myself if I really was worthless? The times I had to rise from ashes? I studied, I fought, I rebuilt my life. And everything I have today isn't because of you. It's because I was strong enough to escape you. Richard froze, speechless. His hand shook as he reached out, but Amelia stepped back. Look at me, she said, her voice firm, unwavering. I have a husband who loves me, 2 wonderful children, and a career I built with my hands. I am no longer the woman you mocked. I am Amelia of today, and you have no power to touch my life ever again. Her words carried through the crowded street, drawing curious glances. Richard's lips moved as if to reply, but he only bowed his head and walked away, his figure shrinking into the fog like a shadow. Amelia watched him go, a strange calm filling her. No joy, no hatred, only one thing: closure. That evening, sitting with Edward and their boys in the warm living room, listening to Henry and Oliver competing to tell stories from school, Amelia felt wrapped in something Richard would never grasp: true love. Edward placed his hand over hers and whispered, You all right? I heard he showed up today. Amelia nodded, her eyes glowing. I'm fine. For the first time, I feel completely free. Outside, the winter wind howled. But inside their home, the warmth of family glowed like an eternal flame. Proof that sometimes, the ghosts of the past exist only to remind us to cherish the present. Summer 2028. Geneva gleamed under the sun, Lake Leman stretching out like a vast mirror of blue. Inside the glass halls of the United Nations, hundreds of delegates from around the world gathered for the Global Conference on Education and Social Justice. Flags rippled, traditional costumes brightened the space, filling it with solemnity and hope. Amelia sat in a cobalt blue dress in the front row, simple yet elegant. Beside her were Edward in a tailored suit, and Henry and Oliver, now 9 years old, in their neat ceremonial uniforms. The twins looked around wide-eyed, their faces lit as though stepping into a dream. Her name rang from the microphone. Please welcome Mrs. Amelia Thompson, Director of the Equal Future Foundation, to receive the Global Award for Contribution to Education. Thunderous applause shook the hall. Amelia drew a deep breath, rose, and squeezed Edward's hand. He returned the gesture, whispering, You did it. Now, this is your moment. She walked to the stage, the light catching her hair in a soft glow. As she bowed to receive the medal from the Secretary-General of the United Nations, a memory struck her 10 years earlier. She had been just a discarded wife, alone in an empty flat. Now, every step of her journey surged back. The tears, the loneliness, the sleepless nights of study, the times she fell and rose again, and the love Edward had given her. When the microphone was placed before her, Amelia lifted her head. The hall fell silent. Her voice rang out low, steady, unwavering. I stand here today not because I am stronger than others. I am simply a woman once dismissed as useless, told with cruelty, No one will ever love you. But from that pain, I found my reason to rise. I dedicate this award to all who have ever been belittled or robbed of belief in themselves. You are worthy of love, of opportunity, of a good life. Never forget. Your value does not depend on whether others see it. It lives within you, waiting for the day you let it shine. A wave of applause crashed through the chamber, long and unending. Delegates stood, many with tears in their eyes. Henry and Oliver whispered to each other, then cheered softly, "That's our mom." After the ceremony, Amelia joined an international roundtable. Reporters crowded, cameras flashing, headlines spreading across major outlets. Amelia Thompson, the woman who turned pain into global strength. That evening, the family dined in a small restaurant by the lake. Not a lavish banquet, but a warm meal with candles and wine. Edward raised his glass, pride glowing in his eyes. "Amelia, today the world called your name. But you are still the woman who made me believe in true love." Henry and Oliver clinked their apple juice glasses, laughing, "Congratulations, Mom. Someday we'll tell our friends that our mother once spoke at the United Nations." Amelia laughed, kissed them both, then met Edward's gaze. She saw an entire universe in his eyes: respect, love, and unwavering faith. That night, standing on the balcony as Geneva sparkled with lights, Amelia whispered to herself, "Richard once said no one would ever love me. But now, not only am I loved, I have a family, and the whole world is listening to my voice. This truly is a triumphal song." She knew the journey was far from over. There were still injustices to fight and doors of education to open. But from this moment on, Amelia would walk forward, not only with titles and awards, but with the strength forged from love and the truth that she had won, not by revenge, but by living a radiant life. One October afternoon, as crimson maples lit the streets of Oxford, Amelia received an unexpected letter. The sender, Richard Carter. The handwriting was shaky, clumsy, nothing like the confident script of years past. Richard wrote that he was being treated in a small medical center, his health ruined after years of drinking and failure. He asked to see her, not to ask for another chance, only to say a final word. Amelia sat in silence for a long time. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to pretend he had never existed. But another part whispered, perhaps she had to face the last remnant of her past to be truly free. The next afternoon, she went to the clinic. The room was bare, smelling faintly of disinfectant. Richard lay on the bed, gaunt, the once proud eyes now lost. He tried to sit up when he saw her, but his frail body allowed only a slight movement. "Amelia." His voice was hoarse, as though 1,000 cigarettes had burned his throat. "You really came?" Amelia pulled a chair closer, sitting at a careful distance. Her expression was calm, no hatred, only observation. "What do you want to say?" she asked. Richard swallowed with effort, then sighed. "I once thought I was the victor. When I left you, I believed I'd gain everything: money, status, a family admired by society. But ironically, I lost it all. And you gained everything. Perhaps I deserve this end." Amelia listened without interruption. He went on, "I've read about you, your speeches, your international awards. I saw your photos with your husband and children in the papers. You shine, while I've become nothing but a shadow." Silence filled the room. Then Richard's voice broke, trembling. "I'm sorry, Amelia, not to seek forgiveness, but so you know, I understand now. The words I once spat, that you were useless, that no one would love you, were nothing but my ignorance and cruelty. The truth is, you've proven the opposite so perfectly." Amelia sat for a long time. Painful memories drifted through her, the mocking laughter, shattered glass, nights of tears alone. Yet strangely, they no longer hurt. They felt like old pages, already read and closed. "Richard," she said softly, "you once destroyed me. But from those ashes, I found the strength to become the woman I am today. I might never have known how strong I could be without those dark years. So, no, I don't hate you anymore." Richard's eyes blurred. Perhaps for the first time, he cried not over material loss, but at the raw truth. He had been wrong, and the woman he scorned had risen far beyond him. Amelia stood. Before leaving, she added, "I didn't come here for revenge. I came to close this chapter. We were once part of each other's lives, but it's over now. I have a family, love, and a future. And you, I hope you find peace in the days you have left." She stepped out, closing the door quietly. In the hallway, Edward was waiting. He took her hand, worry in his eyes. "You all right?" Amelia rested her head on his shoulder, smiling faintly. "I'm all right, truly, this time. That door has closed for good." They left the clinic, walking into Oxford's sunlit streets. In the distance, Henry and Oliver came running, colourful kites in their hands, laughter ringing through the air, sweeping away every lingering shadow. Amelia opened her arms, gathering her sons close, feeling the fullness of the present. At that moment, she knew the circle was closed. The past was only a faded shadow, while the present was a radiant, untouchable, and eternal light.